I was looking at what was left of my 4 years of hellish savings, at that twisted pile of metal, and I heard her smirk. Before her words hit me harder than the impact with the pole, she said, "Mom and Dad will make you forgive me. They always do." I almost dropped the phone. Officer Reynolds, his voice calm but official, was telling me about significant damage and a driver who identified herself as Jaime Anderson. But I already knew. My stomach had knotted up even before he said her name. I didn't need to see what happened. I just knew it was her. This whole story started just 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks and 1 day, to be exact. It was a Tuesday, and I had finally signed the papers for my new Dodge Charger. Not some used junker, but an absolutely new, leather-smelling, dark blue beast. Ethan Anderson, a 35-year-old guy who for the last 4 years had said no to vacations, no to new sneakers, and no to food delivery, finally felt something pure and undiluted: pride. I'd worked my whole life, paid for myself, never asked my parents for a cent, and this car was my silent proof that I was worth something. It was my fortress, my single big purchase that I paid for completely cash. I remember that moment. The dealer handing me the keys, my fingers tracing the sleek, gleaming hood, inhaling that intoxicating scent of fresh leather in the cabin, and thinking, this is mine. Every single part of it is mine. I drove over to show George and Martha, my parents. They live in the same house where we grew up, the house where I always felt like the runner-up. You know, every family has a golden child who can do no wrong. For us, that was my younger sister, Jaime. She's 5 years younger than me, 30, and she's still living on the same soft cushion our parents gave her when she was a kid. She's never held a stable job, always finding herself, and her rent and all her small mistakes have always been covered by the parental bank account. I parked in their driveway, and she was already there, leaning against the garage, with that lazy, self-satisfied smirk that always drove me crazy. She barely looked up from her phone right away. "Nice ride," she said when I turned off the engine. She walked over, leaning on the driver's side window, as if she was appraising something she was about to borrow. "What's the mileage?" she asked. I lied. I said about 200 miles, so she wouldn't know it was almost brand new. I could already feel that familiar tension building. Then, without asking, she reached for the handle, opened the door, and tried to climb in. Let me take it for a spin. It wasn't a request, it was a statement. I immediately slammed the door shut, almost catching her hand. "No way," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I just got it. You are not driving it." She rolled her eyes, as if I had asked her to pay for something. "Oh, come on, Ethan. Don't be such a control freak. It's just a car." "Exactly," I replied, and my voice wavered slightly because that phrase was always her shield. "It's just a car that I paid for with my own money. You don't get to take it." Jaime wasn't used to hearing no. Our parents had taught her that all no's were just wait, or maybe. She just smirked, shrugged, and stepped back. But there was something in that movement, in that look, that sent a cold chill down my spine. I should have trusted my instincts, but who would have thought she'd stoop to outright theft? Later that evening, I stopped by my parents' house to pick up some things I had left in their garage. I left the new car's keys on the entryway table, just for a few minutes while I went upstairs. When I came back down, the keys were gone. And so was the car. I stormed outside, my heart pounding like crazy. She was already long gone. I could hear tires squealing down the next street. For 2 hours, I called her, and every time it went straight to voicemail. I sat in my old beater, which I was about to sell for parts, and felt pure, unadulterated rage choke me. And then the call came. Officer Reynolds. 20 minutes later, I was at the scene. Flashing lights, police officers, a crowd of rubberneckers. And in the middle of it all, what had been my perfect, new Charger just yesterday. The bumper was smashed, the hood crumpled in on itself, one headlight shattered. The car I had invested a piece of my life in was destroyed in a fraction of a second. Jaime stood next to the officer, arms crossed, looking completely unfazed. I climbed out of my old car, slamming the door harder than I intended, and walked up to her. My hands were shaking. "What the hell did you do?" I hissed. She turned to face me. And that was the most infuriating and disgusting moment of my entire life. She smirked. At that very moment, looking at my ruined property, she found the energy for that smirk I'd hated all my life. "It sucks, sure," she said, shrugging, as if she had just dropped my ice cream cone. "But hey, don't freak out. Mom and Dad will make you forgive me. They always do. Everything inside me went cold. That wasn't an apology. That wasn't an admission of guilt. It was an arrogant declaration that my anger, my money, my hard work, none of it mattered, because our parents would always smooth it over. They would always make me swallow my resentment for the sake of family peace. I felt something simmering that had been building for years. This time, I wasn't going to let them. The next morning, the exhaustion was physical, a heavy blanket pressed against my chest. My head was pounding, not just from lack of sleep, but from the sheer, suffocating anticipation of what was coming. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that George and Martha, Mom and Dad, would be calling. They'd be demanding a family discussion, a delicate, highly choreographed maneuver to sweep Jaime's colossal mess under the same rug they'd been using for 30 years. I knew their script. I'd played my role in this tragicomic production too many times. Be reasonable. Ethan, she didn't mean it. Family forgives, it's just a car. And sure enough, when I finally checked my phone, I saw the triage had begun. 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Dad, and a text from Jaime so breathtakingly arrogant. I had to lean against the wall and read it twice just to believe my own eyes. It said, "Stop being dramatic, Ethan. It's just a car. Mom and Dad said we'll figure it out, so quit acting like it's the end of the world." There was no apology, no remorse, not even the slightest acknowledgement that she had stolen my property and destroyed it. Just pure entitlement, dripping from every syllable. The real problem, in her mind, wasn't the theft and the crash. It was my audacity in making a big deal out of it. She truly believed her inconvenience was greater than my loss. I stood there, swallowing the hot surge of rage, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Getting worked up over a text wouldn't help. Jaime had always been this way. But this time, I wasn't going to let them condition me into submission. I wasn't going to be the responsible one who silently cleaned up the debris of her chaos. I drove my beat-up old backup sedan, the one I was supposed to have sold a week ago, to their house. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel, my stomach twisting with a toxic mixture of anger and a strange, dangerous calm. I already knew exactly how this conversation was going to unfold. I walked in without knocking, bypassing the polite pleasantries. I found them sitting stiffly at the kitchen table, their faces a perfect blend of forced concern and thinly veiled annoyance, as if I was the one creating the issue, as if my reaction was the thing that needed to be fixed. Jaime was slouched in one of the chairs, scrolling on her phone, utterly unbothered, just waiting for the whole thing to blow over so she could move on with her life. Mom sighed heavily, setting down her coffee cup as if my mere presence had exhausted her. She rubbed her temples, perfectly framing herself as the victim of this whole tiring ordeal. "Ethan, honey, we need to talk about this situation, because this anger you're holding on to isn't healthy for anyone." I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. A quiet, decades-long fury that I had always suppressed, finally coming to the surface. "My anger?" I repeated, my voice unnervingly low and calm. I rested my hands on the back of an empty chair, gripping the wood so tightly my fingers ached. "You think my anger is the problem here?" Mom exchanged a quick, knowing glance with Dad, a silent communication that made it painfully clear they were unified, that their decision had been made long before I walked through the door. "Sweetheart," she said, and I hated the way her voice dripped with condescension, treating me like a toddler throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. "It's just a car. Jaime didn't mean to crash it, and we don't think it's fair to punish her so harshly for something that was clearly an accident." The dam inside me finally cracked. She stole it, I thought, but I kept my voice flat, devoid of emotion, because I knew if I let myself feel it, I would explode. I told her no. She took my keys anyway. She stole my car, wrecked it, and then smirked in my face because she knew you would cover for her, just like you always do. Jaime let out a dramatic, bored sigh, finally looking up from her phone and rolling her eyes like the entire conversation was beneath her. "Jesus, sis," she muttered, shaking her head. "You're acting like I murdered someone. I made a mistake, okay? Chill out." Dad reached out, placing a gentle, placating hand on mine, his eyes pleading. His expression was carefully crafted into something that looked like love, but was really just manipulation wrapped in a prettier package. "Ethan, you're her brother," he said softly, tilting his head as if speaking to a child in need of correction. I know you're upset, but family forgives, sweetheart. That's what we do. We forgive each other. I stared at him, at the sheer, breathtaking audacity of those words. He had effortlessly placed the entire burden of resolution on me. My feelings were an inconvenience. My hard work meant nothing. My sacrifices were irrelevant as long as Jaime was happy and comfortable. I realized right then that I had spent my entire life being conditioned to accept this reality. My needs came second. My pain was something to be quietly swallowed for the sake of family peace. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into submission this time. So, I did something I'd never done before in front of them. I smiled. It was small, just a flicker of amusement, but it was enough to make my father pause, enough to make Jaime glance up with something almost resembling suspicion. "You know what?" I said, my voice light, my expression deceptively calm. "You're absolutely right, Dad. Family forgives, and I don't want to hold on to this anger anymore." Relief flooded their faces. Jaime's smirk returned, wider than before. They all visibly leaned back in their chairs, convinced they had won, that they had successfully broken me down into the version of myself they preferred, the compliant one. But they had no idea what I was planning. They had no idea that behind my pleasant smile and my easy agreement, I was already putting things in motion. I was going to make Jaime pay for what she did. She just didn't know how yet. I left their house and drove straight to my old, small apartment. I had spent my whole life being told that forgiveness is a virtue, that holding grudges only leads to bitterness. But as I sat in my car outside the insurance office the next morning, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, I realized those rules had only ever applied to me. Jaime had never been expected to forgive, to compromise, or to sacrifice, because Jaime had never faced real consequences. Not once. Not ever. Not in all the years she had coasted through life on a wave of other people cleaning up her messes. But that was about to change, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the one left picking up the pieces. I walked into the insurance office. The calculated rage that had been fueling me since the moment Jaime had sneered in my face was cold and focused. The man at the desk, Mr. Miller, barely looked up as he typed. His voice was clipped and professional as he asked how he could help. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, knowing that once I set this in motion, there would be no turning back. "I need to file a claim for my car," I said, keeping my tone even, my expression carefully neutral. He nodded, clicking a few more times before glancing up. "Was it an accident? Do you have a police report?" "Yes," I said, my pulse steady, my decision unwavering. "There's a report, and I need to report it as unauthorized use." That made him pause. He blinked once, tilting his head slightly, as if trying to determine whether he had misheard me. "Unauthorized use," he repeated, a note of curiosity entering his voice. "Are you saying your vehicle was stolen?" I could have said yes, but I knew better than to lie outright, especially when the truth was just as damning. I never gave permission for her to take it. I clarified, choosing my words carefully, making sure there was no room for misinterpretation. I explicitly told her she couldn't drive my car, and she took it anyway. "That's theft, isn't it?" The man hesitated for only a second before nodding slowly, typing something into his system. "If you can provide proof that you denied her permission and she took the vehicle regardless, then yes, this qualifies as unauthorized use." I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone. I swiftly located the text messages from Jaime, the ones where I had told her no, the ones where she had laughed it off like my words meant nothing. I turned the screen toward him, watching as he read the messages, his eyebrows raising slightly before he nodded again. "This should be sufficient," he said, his voice now purely professional. "Since you're filing for unauthorized use, the liability will not fall on you. It will transfer to the driver." Jaime. The liability would transfer to Jaime. The reality of it sank in slowly, like warm honey drizzling over the cold steel of my fury, coating it in something rich and satisfying. Jaime, who had spent her entire life escaping responsibility, would finally have to answer for something. Jaime, who had laughed in my face and told me I would have to forgive her, was about to learn what it felt like when the world didn't bend to her will. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though inside my heart was thrumming with a strange, unfamiliar thrill. Mr. Miller glanced at his screen, adjusting his glasses before answering. Well, given the extent of the damage, the estimated total she'll be responsible for is somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000. $30,000 to $40,000. I exhaled slowly, absorbing the number, letting it roll over me like a wave of pure vindication. Jaime had never had to deal with anything more than a slap on the wrist. But now that weight was about to come crashing down on her, and I wasn't going to lift a single finger to stop it. I was finally taking control of the narrative they had forced on me for decades. This was my move, and they had no idea the game had even started. I walked out of the insurance office on that second day feeling lighter than I had in years. The heavy weight of being the family's cleanup crew, the one who quietly absorbed the emotional and financial cost of Jaime's existence, had finally lifted. But a quiet, cold satisfaction wasn't the same as peace. My decision to file for unauthorized use, effectively placing a $30,000 to $40,000 debt squarely on Jaime's shoulders, was a bomb I had just armed and left ticking in my parents' living room. I knew the fallout was going to be messy, immediate, and utterly theatrical, because the one thing my parents, George and Martha, hated more than anything was losing control of their perfect, curated family narrative. For the next few days, I had absolute silence from everyone. No calls, no angry texts, no attempts at reconciliation dinner invitations. This silence was more terrifying than any shouting match because it meant they were conferring, planning, and figuring out how to neutralize the threat I had become. They weren't ignoring me. They were building an argument, drafting their defense. I kept my phone close, expecting the explosion to come from my parents demanding I rescind the claim. But the attack, when it finally hit, came from a completely different and far nastier angle. It was a Tuesday of that same intense 3-week period. I was scrolling through Facebook, something I rarely did, when I saw it. A post from my cousin Sarah. Sarah and I were close, or at least, we used to be. She was the one family member who always seemed to see through Jaime's act and often commiserated with me about the exhausting dynamics of our family gatherings. Her post wasn't an explicit attack, which would have been easy to dismiss. It was subtle, calculated, and aimed directly at my carefully constructed image as the hard-working, responsible son. The post started with a generic, saccharine photo of her and Jaime from a few years ago, smiling wide at a family picnic. Then came the caption, and the words twisted something cold in my gut. She wrote about the importance of empathy and perspective in times of stress. She talked about how material things are replaceable, but familial bonds are not. The real punch came at the end. It's a shame when someone is so blinded by pride and a need for control that they choose a piece of metal over the well-being of their own sister. Be kind, everyone. You never know what struggles people are hiding. It was a classic, manipulative jab. No names were mentioned, but every person in our extended family network knew exactly what she was talking about. The car, the accident, and my subsequent unreasonable reaction. I felt the heat rise in my neck. The immediate impulse to defend myself, to lay out the full truth, the theft, the smirk, the years of entitlement. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had chosen my battlefield, and it wasn't Facebook comments. What bothered me most wasn't Sarah's judgment, but the clear, cold certainty that my parents were behind it. They knew I wouldn't budge under their guilt trips, so they went for the social pressure, the soft, insidious weapon of public humiliation and family shame. They were framing me as the villain, the selfish brother who was ruining his sister's life over a replaceable object. I started getting cryptic, pitying messages from acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. Hey Ethan, sorry to hear about your car. Hope things get sorted out. Just remember, family is everything. It was a chorus of well-meaning strangers who only had one side of the story, the side my parents were carefully crafting for them. The tension ramped up 2 days later when Mom finally called. Her voice wasn't angry. It was laced with a chilling, manufactured disappointment. Ethan, she began, the sigh preceding my name like a performance. I just saw Sarah's post. It breaks my heart that people are talking about us like this. Don't you see what you're doing to the family's reputation? It reflects poorly on all of us. You want to talk about reputation, Mom? I asked, my voice flat. Jaime stole my car and crashed it. What do you expect me to do? Send her flowers? She was borrowing it. Mom insisted, the lie smooth and practiced. And you know we were going to handle the insurance. Dad was going to talk to his contact, we were going to cover the difference, and the car would have been replaced. You've complicated everything. You've made it vindictive. This was the financial pressure part of their strategy, mixed with the ongoing shaming. They knew I was financially independent and hated accepting money from them, so they were trying to frame my independence as an obstacle to their solution. They wanted me to believe that my action wasn't about justice. It was about cruelty. You were going to handle it how? I pressed, ignoring the guilt trip. By paying the deductible and letting the rates go up on my policy? Or by covering Jaime's massive liability after I had already filed the report? Be specific, Mom. Because I filed an unauthorized use claim based on the fact that she stole the keys. The liability is legally hers. You can't just make a $40,000 problem disappear with a phone call. The momentary silence on the line was profound. It told me everything. They had underestimated the legal implications. They genuinely thought they could wave their hands and make the consequences vanish. George and I are arranging a family meeting for Friday, Mom finally said, her voice dropping to a cool, businesslike tone that was infinitely more threatening than her previous hysterics. You will be there. Jaime will be there. We will discuss the details of the insurance claim and how you are going to reverse it. Do you understand me? I understand the details of the claim, Mom. I countered, looking at the calendar. Friday was 4 days away, the final countdown. And I understand that the only person who can stop the consequences is the person who created them. I look forward to hearing what Jaime has to say. I hung up, the feeling in my chest a confusing mix of terror and grim determination. The clock was ticking. I had committed to this path, but the rising tide of family betrayal and public shaming was putting severe pressure on me. I knew my parents would use that Friday meeting not to find a solution, but to execute the final, coordinated attempt to break my resolve and force me to submit to their will. The question was, did I have the strength to stand alone against the entire family, against the narrative they had spent my entire life writing? Jaime, who was suddenly silent and absent from social media, was clearly waiting for the parental cavalry. The stage was set. The tension was almost unbearable. I just had to hold on for 4 more days until the truth finally came out. The 4 days leading up to the Friday family dinner were the longest of my life. The social media campaign had quieted down after my parents' initial push, but the damage was done. My phone was a dead weight in my pocket, and every time it lit up with a text from an unknown number, I knew it was another concerned acquaintance with a thinly veiled opinion on my character. I ignored them all. My focus was on Friday. I knew this wasn't just a dinner. It was a carefully orchestrated intervention designed to break my resolve. They were going to try to make me see reason. They were going to try to make me feel guilty. The day of the meeting, I got a text from my dad, George. The message was simple and to the point. Your mother and I have arranged for our lawyer, Mr. Thompson, to be present tonight. This is a serious matter, and we want to ensure everything is handled professionally. My heart dropped. A lawyer? This wasn't just a discussion anymore. They had elevated this to a legal confrontation, a show of force. This was their last-ditch attempt to intimidate me. They were using their money and their connections to try and overpower me, a single guy in a small apartment. It was a clear signal that they were not there to find a compromise, but to force a surrender. I drove over in my old car, the one I used to call the beater. The irony wasn't lost on me. It felt like a symbol of everything I'd had to work for, everything I had to scrape for, while Jaime had always just existed. I pulled into the driveway, and the sight of a black Lincoln Town car with a vanity plate that read, "Attorney," made my stomach churn. This was it. I walked into the house without knocking, just like before. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of my mother's signature roasted chicken. It was a familiar, comforting smell that now felt like a tool of psychological warfare. The table was set with their best china, the candles were lit, and my parents were sitting stiffly at the table, their expressions a carefully curated mix of disappointment and exhaustion. Dad sat at the head, his face a mask of practiced concern, and Mom sat next to him, her fingers steepled, looking like a judge presiding over a courtroom. Jaime was there, too, but she wasn't slouched and scrolling on her phone this time. She was sitting up straight, her hands clasped in her lap, her face pale. She looked scared, but also angry, like an animal caught in a trap that couldn't believe it had been outsmarted. And then there was Mr. Thompson. He was a small, thin man in a perfectly tailored suit, with wire-rimmed glasses that made him look like a predatory owl. He didn't say anything at first, just gave me a cold, assessing look before he opened his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder, placing it squarely in the middle of the table. Dad cleared his throat, a deep, rehearsed sound. "Ethan, thank you for coming. We're here because you've taken a drastic and unnecessary step. We had a plan to resolve this without involving legal and financial repercussions, but you've forced our hand." "I took a drastic step?" I asked, my voice flat, holding back the rising fury. "Jaime stole my car and totaled it. I just filed a report." Jaime flinched at the word stole. She looked at me, her eyes flashing with a combination of rage and fear. "I didn't steal it," she snapped. "I was just borrowing it." "Borrowing it after I explicitly said no." I countered. "After I took the keys back? That's not borrowing, Jaime. That's theft." "Ethan, please," Mom interjected, her voice sharp. "Let's be civil. Mr. Thompson is here to help us reach an amicable solution." Mr. Thompson finally spoke, his voice clipped and professional. "Mr. Anderson, your parents are prepared to make you an offer. They will fully cover the cost of the damages to your vehicle, including any additional fees, and provide you with a new car of comparable value. In exchange, you will sign a document to void the unauthorized use claim and any further legal action you may have planned against your sister or your parents." The offer was staggering. A brand new car. Just like that. It was the bribe of a lifetime, a golden ticket that would allow me to walk away from the whole situation without any further trouble. It was exactly the kind of easy fix my parents always preferred, the kind that allowed everyone to pretend the bad thing never happened. It was a moral dilemma. I could take the money, get my new car, and return to my comfortable, peaceful life. The money would solve the immediate problem, and I could finally let go of the anger. But if I took their offer, what would it mean? It would mean that Jaime gets to walk away from her mistake without a single consequence. It would mean that my parents' toxic pattern of enabling her behavior would continue. It would mean that my hard work, my self-reliance, and my anger were just a bargaining chip to be used and discarded. It would mean that I was giving up my right to justice in exchange for a temporary fix. I looked at Jaime. She was watching me, her eyes pleading, but not with remorse. She was pleading with me to take the deal, to let her off the hook, to let things go back to normal. She had no understanding of what she had done or what my sacrifice would mean. She just saw a way out. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're offering me a new car to drop the claim. But you're not asking Jaime to pay for any of it. You're just erasing her mistake with your money." "It's a gift," Mom said, her voice softening, a note of desperation in her eyes. "From us to you. We just want to move on." "It's not a gift," I said, my gaze locked on Mr. Thompson. "It's a cover-up, and it's not going to happen." I saw the shock register on their faces. The lawyer's expression didn't change, but his pen stilled over his notepad. My parents looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Jaime, for the first time, looked truly terrified. "Ethan, don't be a fool," Dad said, his voice hard. "This is your last chance. Take the offer. It's more than fair." "No," I said, my voice gaining strength. "It's not fair. What's fair is for Jaime to face the consequences of her actions. What's fair is for her to learn that she can't just take things from people and expect someone else to pay for it." The air in the room became charged. I had just rejected their ultimatum and laid down my own. The game was no longer on their terms. This wasn't about the car anymore. This was about a lifetime of injustice, and for the first time, I felt like I was holding all the cards. I watched as my father's face went from pale to red, his anger finally breaking through his carefully constructed composure. I knew what was coming next. The final act. I had forced their hand, and now there was nothing left but to watch it all play out. The tension was at its breaking point. I was about to find out if my choice had been worth the price. My no hung in the air, heavy and solid, shattering the illusion of the staged dinner party. The silence that followed wasn't polite. It was the suffocating stillness before an explosion. I had rejected the new car, the clean slate, the peace they were trying to buy. I had chosen a principle over their money, and they looked at me like I was insane, like I had committed a profound betrayal. Dad, George, was the first to move. His face, usually controlled and placid, was mottled with red. He slammed his hand on the table, not a furious strike, but a frustrated, defeated thump. You're doing this just to spite us, Ethan. Just to ruin your sister's life. She's your family. I'm doing this because for 30 years, you taught her that actions have no consequences as long as you're there to clean up. I stated, my voice low and steady. I didn't raise it. The calm was my shield. The consequence of her action is the unauthorized use claim. I'm not ruining her life. She did that the moment she stole my keys. Jaime finally snapped. She pushed her chair back, the sound scraping violently against the hardwood floor. She was on her feet, trembling, her previously pale face now flushed with an agonizing mixture of fear and pure, unadulterated fury. She leaned across the table, her voice shaking. You're a sociopath, Ethan. You're actually letting the insurance company go after me for $40,000? You know I don't have that kind of money. You're trying to destroy me over a car. You'll figure it out, Jaime, I replied, using the dismissive phrase she had always thrown at her problems. That's what you always do, right? That was the turning point for my parents. They realized, in that exact moment, that the usual methods of manipulation, the guilt, the shame, the money, were useless. They couldn't control me anymore. Mom, Martha, placed her hands flat on the table, her eyes suddenly sharp and cold, losing all pretense of maternal affection. Ethan, we need to be transparent here, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if letting me in on a secret. You know how sensitive Jaime is. She's been struggling with her mental health. She's fragile. If this goes through, it will crush her. Her credit, her job prospects, everything. Is this really worth seeing your own sister suffer a breakdown? This was their final, brutal play, the moral dilemma. They weren't just asking me to forgive the car. They were asking me to be responsible for Jaime's entire future and mental stability. They were forcing me to choose between my own financial and emotional justice and the possibility of completely derailing my sister's life forever. I looked at my mother, who was using my sister's vulnerability as a weapon, and then at Jaime, who was staring at me, half expecting, half pleading for me to cave. I had spent my life protecting her from the world, and in turn, she had learned to destroy my things without a second thought. I won't be responsible for her mental health, Mom, I said slowly, choosing my words with clinical precision. She is 30 years old. Her fragility isn't my burden to carry. My car was the one thing I bought that was truly mine, and you're still trying to take the last piece of control away from me by making me pay the price for her irresponsibility. Mr. Thompson, the lawyer, finally intervened, sensing the negotiation was over. Mr. Anderson, your parents are willing to pay the full deductible and arrange for an installment plan for the remaining debt under Ms. Anderson's name, but they will cover the monthly payments. No, I cut him off. The unauthorized use claim is filed. The liability is assessed. The claim stands. I reject any attempt to co-sign, pay installments, or otherwise shield her from the legal consequences. I want the process to run its course. My father gasped, clutching his chest dramatically, a performance I had seen hundreds of times. You just severed yourself from this family, Ethan, he whispered, his voice trembling with manufactured pain. We won't stand for this cruelty. I looked from my father's theatrical outrage to my mother's calculating fury, and finally, to Jaime's face, which had crumpled from anger into genuine, horrified comprehension. She wasn't used to seeing consequences, let alone ones she couldn't simply cry her way out of. You severed the ties years ago, I replied, standing up, my chair scraping back slightly. Every time you rewarded her irresponsibility and punished my independence. I'm just making it official. The car was the final straw. I walked out. I didn't look back at the lawyer, who was hastily packing his briefcase, or at my parents, who were already starting the inevitable, loud argument with Jaime. I just kept walking. The air outside was cool and crisp, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension inside. The final paperwork confirming the financial liability, $36 for $50, payable by Jaime, arrived a week later, marking exactly 1 month since I had bought the car. I signed the release for my insurance payout and used the money to make a significant down payment on a small condo, not another car. I didn't need the status symbol anymore. The real victory wasn't the money or the new property. It was the quiet, absolute control I had gained over my own life. I haven't heard from Jaime since that night. My parents sent a single, frigid email 2 days after the meeting, stating that my actions were unforgivable and that they needed space. I didn't reply. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Jaime, having to face a reality where her parents can't simply fix everything with a check. I wonder if she is working multiple jobs, if the debt is crushing her, if she finally understands the value of what she took. I don't feel triumph, not really. I feel a profound, exhausting sadness for the family I lost, but I also feel a quiet, unshakable peace for the man I finally became. I took the hit, survived the blow, and refused to be the one who cleaned up the mess. But as I sit here, drinking my coffee, I have to ask myself, did I truly win by forcing her to lose everything? Or did I just finally admit that some things, even family, are beyond repair? The car is gone, the money is spent, but the silence is the loudest thing of all. And I still don't know if I chose justice, or just a more complicated kind of loneliness.